1 ಕಿಲೋ ಮಾಂಬಳ ಎவ்வளோப்பா? ಹೆಂಗೆ ಎಡು?
ಇವತ್ತು ಯಾವ ಮೀನಿದೆ? ಪಕ್ಕಾ ಫ್ರೆಶ್ ಇದೆಯಾ? ಭಯ್ಯ, 2 ಕುಲ್ಲಚ್ಚ ಇದೆನಾ?
2 for the price of 1. That's a deal.
Hello and welcome to L is for Labor, your source of information for all things labor. This series takes you through the world of work in India. Today, we're going to talk about street vendors.
Street vendors are an essential part of the modern day imagination of urban India. But street vendors are not just a modern phenomenon. Throughout history, whether in the United States, Japan, or South and Southeast Asia, street vendors have played a crucial role as agents of commerce, also profoundly influencing our cultural habits. There is even evidence of street vendors dating back all the way to ancient Egypt, although the nature of markets and street vending have obviously evolved over time.
So, what does this history look like closer to home in India? Let's travel back in time to the city of Delhi, to one of my favorite places to shop, but circa 1600s, Chandni Chowk Market.
When Shah Jahan establishes a new imperial capital at Shah Jahanabad, he personally is responsible for the construction of the Red Fort, a little later the Jama Masjid, and quite possibly laying out of the main thoroughfare between the Lahore gate of the fort and Fatehpuri Masjid, an avenue which we today refer to as Chandni Chowk. The rest of the walled city of Shah Jahanabad, he basically apportions to different stakeholders within his empire. Some of his senior children, for example, major noblemen of the realm, important communities. And the idea is that each of these stakeholders will develop certain neighborhoods of the city independently. And eventually they build their residences, they build commercial property, markets, mosques, etc. And over the next several decades, Chandni Chowk evolves as one of the principal commercial areas of the walled city of Shah Jahanabad. Jumping to the present day, one can see that Chandni Chowk continues to be this vibrant part of Delhi's story. It's a great equalizing space where people from all walks of life converge. Social, commercial, religious activities are played out every day. You could buy the cheapest of electronics here to the most expensive wedding garments. You could, buy some of the most affordable street food, at the same time some of the most expensive sweets from old and hallowed confectioners. So it's a great melting pot of people, and anybody who comes here cannot miss the different street vendors who are found all over Chandni Chowk, selling both goods and services.
According to the book Chandni Chowk, The Mughal City of Old Delhi by Dr. Swapna Little, even back in the Mughal era, the old Chandni Chowk market had shops dealing in commodities from fabrics and weapons to glassware. As of present day, according to official figures, India has a total of 10 million street vendors. For a random point of comparison, this is higher than the entire population of New York City, which is 8.2 million as per the latest statistics.
It is highly likely, however, that these figures are underreported owing to an entire host of reasons. Some of these include the vast informality of street vendors and many street vendors also being migrant workers. Now, when we think of street vendors, we often consider them one large homogeneous group. But the truth is, just as they were selling all sorts of wares back in Mughal times in the city of Old Delhi, street vendors today are exceedingly diverse.
The first way of classifying street vendors is by their type of work. Every street vendor is, in reality, connected to a much larger market and economy where they play a crucial role. Fish vendors, for instance, play a critical role in India's larger economy of fish. Vegetable vendors contribute to the larger economy of vegetables. And then, of course, there are those vendors who sell non-perishable items, such as clothes.
The second way of classifying street vendors is based on their movement.
When located in one place throughout the time of their work, this type of worker is termed a street vendor. Alternatively, when their type of work means that they are constantly on the move, this is still vending, but the type of worker is termed a hawker.
Now, as we've established, street vendors have played an important part in our lives, influencing us throughout history, and they continue to be integral to modern urban life. This is whether by democratizing access to goods and services, influencing our art, and even influencing us culturally.
An engaging series of books named the Cairo Trilogy, written by the Egyptian author and Nobel laureate Naguib Mahfouz in the 1950s, makes for an apt example. The trilogy tells the story of 3 different generations of families during a period of immense change in Egypt. From World War I and the 1919 Egyptian Revolution against British colonial rule through to 1944 and World War II. All 3 novels are rich in their descriptions of interacting with street vendors in thrumming marketplaces, adding context and ambience to the books. A quote from the second book reads, "The air was thick with the smell of frying food from the street vendors' carts, mixing with the scent of fresh bread and spices from the nearby shops."
Although street vendors play a vital economic function and add so much vibrance and color to our urban lives and streets, the sad reality is that they are often grappling with livelihoods precarity. A big part of this problem relates to the fact that workers are informal. In other words, workers do not have contracts or formal employer-employee relationships. Furthermore, these workers' workplaces are rather different from ours. Their workplace is, in fact, the streets.
So we don't have a concept of using public space as a workspace yet, but many in the informal sector use public space as their workspace. People who are working in public space becoming their workspace, and they are self-employed. And that means they don't have any employer as such to regulate their rights. So that means in public space means public authorities are your employers. That is a concept that Seva has developed over the years. So that means state is your employer when you are working in a public space.
Most street vendors are also daily wage workers, many of whom tend to borrow on informal credit to purchase goods in the morning that they then sell during the course of the day. Here's a little bit about the everyday economics of street vending in the life of a vegetable vendor.
जैसे उसने कुछ पैसा लिया, उधार ले लिया, सपोज करो उसने 5,000 रुपया उधार ले लिया, तो उसको 500 रुपये पे करना है, 5% पे भी 500 रुपये पे करना है उसको। तो वो एक तो 500 रुपये का घाटा हुआ, दूसरा वो सब्जी मार्केट जाएगा सब्जी लेने, सब्जी वाले का बताती हूँ मैं, सब्जी लेने जा रहा है, वो ले आया सब्जी, और सब्जी अगर बिक गई तो ठीक है, नहीं बिकी तो प्रॉब्लम है। उसको रोजमर्रा की मतलब जो जरूरतें वो भी पूरी करनी है, और उधर वो जो ब्याज पे पैसा लिया है वो भी पूरा करना है। तो उस दौरान वो बहुत परेशान हो जाता है, क्योंकि ये जो दलाल होते हैं, जो ठेकेदार होते हैं, ठेके मतलब ब्याज पे पैसा देते हैं, वो लोग रोज का रोज पैसा लेते हैं। तो जैसे आप मान के चलो कि आज उसने 4,000 रुपया लिया, तो उसमें से 3,000 का तो वो सामान लाएगा, 1,000 अपने पास रखेगा, शाम को उसको पैसा भी देना है। तो कहने का मतलब है कुछ ब्याज कट गया, और कल जो उसको देना है 500 रुपया, वो उसके लिए भी तैयारी करनी है, अपने घर का खर्च भी निकालना है।
All this is vastly exacerbated by clampdowns by law enforcement and local authorities on street vendors. Until as recently as 2014, when the Street Vendors Act came about, on the heels of immense efforts, especially by civil society, workers and unions, street vendors were essentially illegal.
तो वो लोग होते हैं, तो वो लोग कभी भी आते हैं
और कभी भी हटा देते हैं। तो उसमें क्या होता है, उनको परेशानियाँ आती हैं, क्या आती हैं कि सामान जब वो लाए हैं, उनका सामान गिर जाएगा। सारा सामान तितर-बितर हो जाएगा, गिर जाएगा वो, तो उनका नुकसान भी हो जाता है कई बार। उनको वो सामान लेने के लिए बड़ा संघर्ष करना पड़ेगा, पहले उसको हाथ-पैर जोड़ना पड़ेगा, नहीं भैया मत ले जाओ, हमारे पास ये डॉक्यूमेंट है। वो लोग डॉक्यूमेंट को नहीं मानते, कोई भी कागज़ हो। तो मेरा मानना है कि बहुत बड़ी परेशानी है, ज़्यादातर फल सब्ज़ी विक्रेता को आती है, क्योंकि उनका जो फल होता है, वो सड़ जाता है।
So it is apparent that different types of vendors are impacted by issues in different ways. Those with perishable goods are even worse off than others if their goods are confiscated. As is often the case with the world of work, intersectional considerations such as gender, caste, and migration status play a role in the specific issues different vendors face. Here's an example from the fish vending sector.
The issues of women fish vendors are completely different from vegetable vendors. Means the timing, the fish comes normally at midnight or early morning, so women have to come early morning or they have to sit till late night, and it smells. So that means it has to be in a very sophisticated area. It cannot be in public areas, but it could be in very sophisticated areas where they have to treat it very nice and clean, and they have to keep the place nice, and means all those issues come. So for each and everything we have to really fight with the municipalities, to keep. And it is easy for the municipalities to say that no, we are going to evict, we are making this area free of vending, because we don't want fish to be sold there. So this is how the complexity works. I'm saying the complexity of gender, culture, caste, culture into one particular sector.
There is, however, some good news. The 2014 Street Vendors Act is one example of a policy-making step which is immensely in the right direction. However, how we actually translate the law into on-ground implementation remains a huge question.
It's actually a rights-based law. It has been a very significant shift that had happened in recognizing street vendors, and one of the significant structure that we look forward is the town vending committees that have been established as part of the law. So it's a tripartite structure actually. That means representatives of vendors, representative of the state, representative of like the so-called employers, organizations. Means it's not the so-called employers, but the municipal authorities, the police, the town planning authorities, all such people. So it's like a tripartite form, but it's not a tripartite form, but it's a representational structure that has come up. With street vendors have like 40% street vendors have representation in the town vending committee, so they have a big voice in decision making. So town vending committee is one of the the remarkable features of the law that has come, which means that town vending committee will take major decisions on street vendors of the particular municipality or whatever local self-government. They will take decisions for the street vendors, means in terms of regularizing them, issuing identity cards, issuing license, providing vending zones, demarcating vending zones, and also dispute settlements of different forms, the vendors.
However, various gaps remain between existing laws and their implementation. So now to the question, what can we do to enhance the lives of street vendors?
A former mayor of Bogota, Enrique Peñalosa, once said, "An advanced city is not a place where the poor move about in cars. Rather, it's where even the rich use public transportation." In effect, we can assess how equitable a city is simply by seeing how much of a road is given to buses, pedestrians, and people versus private cars. More people-centered design would center the former over the latter. Using this lens, we need to first think of street vendors not just as human, but as assets to our cities. Collaborative approaches between local authorities and workers, instead of forceful methods, would help complicated issues such as contestations over public space. Various examples of collaboration already exist, with civil society and unions working closely with local authorities across various cities on gender-based violence and harassment issues, effective bystander intervention, and even better traffic regulation. We then, of course, need to continue our efforts towards implementing the existing Street Vendor Act. More has to be done at the policy level as well to recognize this as a labor issue, since street vendors are workers too, and not just artifacts of urban spaces. Basic things which would also improve our public spaces, such as more shaded areas and accessible restrooms, would also go a long way. And, as always, informing ourselves as consumers goes a long way too.
I shall sign off with a quote from the book Tiny Moons, A Year of Eating in Shanghai by the author Nina Mengia-Pols.
These tiny moons, dumplings, baos, egg tarts are not just food. They are memories of the people who make them, of the streets where I have eaten them. In every bite, there is the taste of home, of belonging, and of the vendors who offer their food with a knowing smile, as though they too are part of the story.
The Migration Story.